Here. Hi, it's Professor Scott. I'm here to talk you through our week 1 readings and lecture. So let's jump in. The first reading you have is Enuma Elish, and this is a Mesopotamian myth from circa, which means about 1700 to 1100 BC. And I get that that's a long circa. This is the oldest of our 3 texts this week by a pretty high margin. It was written in cuneiform on clay tablets, and it was recited publicly in Babylon during an annual New Year festival. So it's not something that people would necessarily sit down and read. And it is quite violent, loud, and politically charged. So, the basic plot we have in the beginning, there are 2 primordial beings. We have Apsu, which translates to fresh water, and Tiamat, which translates to salt water. They intermingle and they produce younger gods who are chaotic and noisy. So, Apsu wants to destroy them. The younger gods find this out, kill Apsu first, and then Tiamat rises in fury. The god Marduk steps up, defeats Tiamat in a spectacular battle, and makes the world out of her body. Sky comes from one half, earth from the other, and then Marduk creates humans from the blood of a defeated rebel god. As I said, this is a violent one. So, the key ideas here are that creation was an act of violence and conquest, as opposed to some other myths where we see love and intention, and the world is literally built on a corpse. In terms of humans' purpose, they exist to serve, and we are afterthoughts of the divine, created for labor, not necessarily dignity. And finally, order is achieved through force. So chaos is the original state, and civilization is the suppression of that chaos. Okay, moving on, many of you might be familiar with Genesis chapters 1 and 2. This is from the Hebrew Bible, which was compiled again around the 10th to 5th century BCE. Again, most of you probably have some prior exposure, even if you haven't actually sat down and read the chapters. It's just kind of a cultural phenomenon that people know this story. So set aside as much of that as you can as you read it, and try to notice things that you maybe haven't noticed before. So the first thing to notice is that there are actually 2 different creation accounts here. You have Genesis 1, which is structured and repetitive by design. You have that repetition of the phrase, and God said, and it was so, and it's kind of a predictable rhythm that gets going. In this story, everything has its place, everything is ordered, humans come last, and they are given dominion. Chapter 2 starts with a different order, a different name for God, in a very different tone. So this is more earthy, more intimate, more immediate. God scoops up clay, breathes into it, plants a garden, and notices that Adam is lonely. So potentially, these are not the same exact story. All right, so key ideas to note in Genesis. Creation is by speech, which is an interesting idea to mull over. The world comes into being because God says it, and language is the creative force. We also have the idea of creation by touch. So God is a potter, a gardener, maybe a surgeon, and humans are formed from the earth. Okay, so the ground, the word for ground, gives us the name Adam. Also, the role of humans is quite different. They have responsibility and relationship. They are not just a labor function. There is the idea of stewardship, naming, and companionship. All right, moving on to our Chinese creation myth. This is Pangu and the creation of the world from the 3rd to 4th century CE. Okay, so that is after the year 0 in our Gregorian calendar. And this is the shortest of the 3 texts, but it's also fairly deep. It's doing something fairly philosophically sophisticated. In the beginning here, we have a great vision. The universe is an egg. So again, it's undifferentiated, chaotic, no distinction. Inside it grows Pangu, and he's a primordial giant, and he grows for 18,000 years. When he finally hatches and stands, the egg cracks and the light parts float up to become the sky, the heavy parts sink to become the earth, and Pangu himself keeps them apart by growing taller every single day. Then Pangu dies, and this is the heart of the story. His body, again, becomes the world. His breath becomes the wind in the clouds. His voice becomes thunder. His left eye becomes the sun. His right eye, the moon. His hair becomes forest, and his sweat becomes rain. And lastly, his flesh becomes the earth, the soil. Key ideas for this one: creation is not conquest or command. It's transformation and sacrifice. So the world is a gift of that sacrifice. nature is not separate from the divine. Divine is nature in terms of the divine body, and the cosmos is personal. And there's no hierarchy of materials. Wind, rain, mountain, river, all are equally sacred and equally a part of Pangu. All right, so there are some comparisons to make across the texts as you read them. Now, I'm going to just say I know these are dense and they're difficult to sit down with, in terms of focus and attention. You might have to come back several times, but they are worth the time and the thoughtful reading that you put in. So do actually try to read the texts rather than the summary. Notice the language. Right? And in addition to noting how the story is told, you can ask some common questions as you read each text. So the first question is, what came first? Okay, what is the initial state of the story? Where do humans fit is another thing to consider. Okay, so are they servants? Are they companions? Are they inheritors? All of these stories approach humankind differently. Another question to consider, what is creation made of? So literally, what's the physical form of creation? And then finally, what is the creator like? You can kind of think of these different personalities of God. Are they one of many? Are they one? Do they have a personality? Do they seem human? Do they not? Notice all of these things. All right, so in terms of literary tools that we're practicing, when you look at the text itself, you want to be noticing tone, imagery, conflict, symbolism, and especially the values embedded in the structure. So think of this as a story that parents would tell their children generation after generation. These stories were repeated for centuries, sometimes for thousands of years. So what values were being passed along in the form of these stories? That's really something to consider as you read. All right, I think that will give you a good start and a good foundation to read these texts. As always, please reach out with any questions.